record. That's so exciting. We are now going to move on to Reg. Reg is back. Reg was lost, but Reg is back with us now. Please put your hands together for Reg Braithwaite.
Hola. There we go. Imagine this works for the first time. Aha. Imagine we have a lot of monkeys. Oh, I know, some of you are very literal, or massively parallel hardware, the kind you would use to, I don't know, read everybody's mail. Or, well, you got the idea. Seriously, is there anyone who doesn't believe that all of Windows is a botnet? Not just the ones the Russians have. Or the monkeys. Now, if you had a lot of monkeys, what do you need for this conversation to be relevant to a talk about programming? Correct! Typewriters. We've got lots and lots of them, easy to find and cheap because nobody uses them anymore. I'm liking this startup. They work hard, but randomly. Now, I know this sounds like such a bad idea, but so far, that process got us here. And as of last week, to me, I'm very excited about this. It happened in my lifetime. We actually left the solar system, and a piece of us is in interstellar space. Yeah. All from bits of pond scum that crawled out of the ocean. It's pretty amazing. So there are monkeys producing works of great beauty. Remember, everybody has a mother who loves them. And this one here is for Mats. It's one of the most famous. As a matter of fact, never mind the language. This poem is one of the most beautiful things ever written by a human being in any language, from any culture. So our monkeys will make some of this stuff. Of course, as people who are familiar with this metaphor know, they'll also make some of this stuff. I think if Abdi is here somewhere, he'll be able to explain during the Q&A why this is incredibly bad code. He explained it to me, and I got it immediately, and I wrote that code. We can, the typical thing for English-centric people is to say that they'll write the works of Shakespeare. I like to think a little bit more in the last century, Phil Dick. Or here. They could produce, if they were typing out 3D modeling designs or something, the works of Gaudi. Eventually they would. And you're all saying to yourself, okay, the next slide must be, why won't this work? You're right. So obviously there aren't enough typewriters. I mean, besides the fact that they're practically extinct, and now, people do things like plant things in them and put them out in the garden to remind people of how hard they had it in university. Meanwhile, they forget that their grandparents had to write everything out by hand. But obviously there aren't enough typewriters, but there's something more important which I think is relevant to what we do. And this is not a generic, although right now, the only piece of Ruby code I showed was bad Ruby code. This isn't really a generic talk about all programming. There's something very specific about Ruby programming that I'm getting to. And let's talk about what it is. By starting by saying the typewriters aren't the point. The reason that's bad is not because we don't have enough typewriters or enough monkeys, or you calculate how many atoms there are and how many seconds since the beginning of the universe, you still won't be able to. That's not the point. The flaw with this theory, that we can just generate all the works of Shakespeare or all the code of Mats, or if we give them enough time with monkeys, they'll come up with a perfectly multi-threaded implementation of MRI. We just have to wait. The problem starts here. There will always be faster typewriters over time. Agreed? They just get faster and faster. And then we come up with some limits. We say that, due to the scale and quantum effects, you can't make transistors smaller than a certain amount. And you've forgotten that there's a whole generation of people growing up who are smarter than we are. And they solve that problem. And looking at this group of beautiful people who have been very patient with my technical issues, thank you, I'll say there'll always be smarter monkeys. And actually, that's kind of the problem. We've developed greater and greater ways to create words. Is the internet not proof that we have now the world's greatest ability for absolute idiots to write words? Is there anyone here who's not sure about that? If so, follow me on Twitter, Ragenwald. You'll soon be convinced. The fact of the matter is, the problem with our monkey idea, randomly creating things, is that it's too good. In as much as typewriters are terrible compared to massively parallel hardware and so on, it's just too good. We get too many books. How do you find Shakespeare when the monkeys are typing away? How do you know? How do you tell the difference between Cheval, remember we had a little picture of him before, and Gaudi's work? Now, there's a little asterisk there because I make it sound as if Cheval is terrible and Gaudi is amazing. That's not exactly true. They're different kinds of people. But the point is, if you actually wanted monkeys to generate architecture, you have to know what kind of architecture you want so that you can say, yes, I'm looking for Cheval, echo, or no, I want Gaudi. And you need to have some way of saying, the one on the top is Cheval, and the one on the bottom is Gaudi. Otherwise, the monkeys are wasting their time. They don't care, but we care. Now, as George Carlin says, and I'll try to do his voice, that sounds vaguely important. How do we distinguish the works of Ferdinand Cheval from Antoni, I say Antonio all my life, but it's Antoni Gaudi. I hope I'm not mispronouncing the Gaudi name. How many people know that this is the only problem that matters on the internet? One hand. Well, the rest of you are in a moment going to start nodding. This is the spam versus ham problem, isn't it? Is there anyone here who doesn't want better solutions to this problem? Right. The only problem that matters is actually recognizing quality. Generating is not a problem. We act like it's a problem, and the whole thesis of my talk here is that we act like it's a problem, but it's actually not a problem. If you don't think we have enough good software now, all we have to do is give more computers and more access to younger people all over the world. There are billions of people, as we're sitting here, who are coming online to the internet using incredibly cheap phones like Firefox OS and so on, and they're finding tools that allow you to program online. In my life, I would say never mind my lifetime, the number of people actually trying to write programs will probably double in the next 12 months, just from that alone. Great programs, important programs, I don't know. But we don't really have a shortage of monkeys at the moment. We're getting more and more all the time. What we have a shortage of is recognizing the good stuff from the bad. Now, so far I've only showed one Ruby thing, so let's start talking about it. Oh, that's a good slide. Where did I get that? This is the truth. You may not like it, and I hope I'm not offending anyone who has deeply spiritual beliefs that say otherwise, but I'm telling you, this is what I sincerely believe, and all I can do is share with you what I sincerely believe. We're just monkeys with typewriters. And you can see this because everyone treats us like monkeys with typewriters. Isn't this what happens if you call up a company and say, so how are you going to solve your software problems over the next year? Yes. We need smarter monkeys or more monkeys. Those are the two business strategies, smarter monkeys and more monkeys. GitHub goes with the smarter monkeys. Big Co, the typical Big Co goes with the more monkeys outsourced to these various places, but they're all about the monkeys. Now, we programmers are smarter than that. We know better. We don't ask for smarter monkeys. We're already smart. And we don't ask for more monkeys because the trouble is somebody will figure out how to clone us, and we might not like ourselves enough to want to work with ourselves. So we say we need better typewriters. So we want to learn how to program Emacs better, or Vim, or heck, even a certain large company that is one of the sponsors of this thing and sends people all over the world kind of acts like it's in the better typewriter business. But you can't ask programmers. I mean, outside of this conversation, where I act like I'm all wise and everything, if you say, hey, Reg, how are you going to be a better programmer? I'm going to tell you about some library I'm working on. What is that if not improving my typewriter? I wrote a book for that other language, which is called Java something, Java drink script something, where I talked about combinators. Heady stuff, lovely stuff, really engaging to read. I encourage all of you to get it. And when I say get it, if you come and ask me, I'll give you a free copy. I'm not actually telling you to go out and buy it. But the problem is, all that stuff is just improving the typewriter. It doesn't solve the fundamental problem. You can't ask a programmer how to get better results. We're hidebound by what we know, by what we grew up with. We're like those people Henry Ford has famously said, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. That's who we are as programmers. We learn by watching what programmers do. And what I find really interesting about Ruby, so you may look at my trajectory and see that I've been writing a lot of JavaScript and so on, and this, that, and the other thing. But I'm always drawn back to Ruby, not because of the language, but because of the community, which is in part a consequence of mats, and it's in part a consequence of when you have a language designed for the joy of programming, you get a certain type of programmer who uses it, and that feeds into the community thing. And then we are nice because mats is nice, and one thing leads to another. And when we're not arguing about what form the next generation of implementation should take, we're actually amazingly great people in our community. So if you actually look at what Ruby programmers do, and you notice now I'm not talking about what's happening over in .NET world or anything. The answer is Ruby programmers are intensely social coders. I will stand up here and say that we are the most social of the various tribes of programmers on the planet. This is the most social tribe. We practically invented it, the idea of social coding. Now, people will say, well, Reg, you weren't around in the 70s, you would have known about. Actually, I was. And I do remember when sharing code consisted of taking a stack of punch cards and putting them in a machine that actually duplicated the punch cards physically for you. This is like a typewriter with some wires that makes another typewriter type. I kid you not, that's how code was shared. And I've done it. But we learn a few things about social coding. Now, I admit, I pick these things at random, but they're all incredibly sort of important. And I could pick up 5 more, but you're supposed to give 5 plus or minus 2 examples. So I said, why not just stop at 3 for once, instead of saying that's an excuse to do 7. With many eyes, all bugs are shallow. I think that's Linus Torvalds, is that correct? This is the interactive part. It's okay to say, you're an idiot, Reg, you're wrong, or yes, that's correct, or he stole it from somebody else. Does anyone know if that's actually him? Yes? All right. That's a deep thing. That completely changes the way you write software, doesn't it? Inasmuch as we'd like to say that nothing should ever be put up on GitHub or any other repository without it already being nice and polished because people don't want to use it if there's bugs in it, the fact of the matter is those libraries that have survived were the ones that got up early enough to get feedback and then managed to somehow coerce other people into fixing the bugs or identifying the bugs. You'll know by looking at the various types of repositories and code communities around in the world that the ones which produce the most successful code are not the ones which have the best code syntax highlighting tool online. They're the ones that enable the workflow for pull requests or submitting patches or having usable discussion threading. This is an unsolved problem in my lifetime, figuring out how to get people to talk on the internet in an effective way. Those things matter in a huge way. In the 80s, I think, there were all sorts of talk about how object-oriented this and that were going to allow us to reuse code by making components that plug together. And people created things. I remember a cover, a Byte one year talked about the software bus. They were going to design some software that worked like an S100 bus, a physical bus. And those things have kind of come true today with gems. There really is a gem for that, for just about everything. I recently had to work on something, and 20-something years ago, I would have had out algorithm books, and I would have been implementing, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, Levenstein, and doing some longest common subsequence stuff. And you know what? I did nothing of the sort. I just used gems. These and other factors, and if you go out in the hallway and you sort of buy into at least some of this, and you talk amongst yourselves, you'll come up with, I think, 50 more examples. They all lead to the conclusion that monkey power is increasing exponentially in a social coding environment. You have access to other people's code, you have access to other people's ideas. The more you communicate, the more lines there are between the nodes, the more arcs between the nodes, I should use the correct terminology, the more software comes out. It's more important than how powerful every node is. And we know this is also true in hardware, right? Like the people are always making these incredible supercomputers to sell to the US government because that's what the US government buys. But when they want to actually make a Bitcoin mining rig, nobody fools around with any of that shit, right? They use cheap processors running in massively parallel scale. And we monkeys with typewriters work exactly the same way. Scale is much more important than power. That seems like a terrible thing for me to say, and I hope no one will remember that the next time I have to negotiate a raise, but it's true. No, seriously, we built a whole industry saying, I'm sorry, Big Co, you can't just hire 10 people from India or China and expect them to be as good as one good person here. That's actually true. But it's not true that 100 people working inside of a company are going to be more powerful than the same company with 10 people who talk to 10 people in another company, 10 people in another company, 10 people in another company, one person over there, 2 people over there, for a total of 100 spread out over a larger network. That is going to produce better code. I wouldn't say that companies are doing it wrong by trying to have more people who are less smart or whatever. It's not what they're trying to do that's wrong, they're just going about it the wrong way. And we, in the open source society, our community, open source, it's like pond scum. It just is. I can't tell you what to do. I'll try it. Everyone stand up. See? You know when you'll stand up? When you have to go to the bathroom. That's how this works. We evolve just like the monkeys banging out on typewriters, and those things which seem to repeat themselves carry on. And so the conclusion I draw from observing the way we monkeys with typewriters behave socially, and again, I am mindful that this analogy, while it is somewhat amusing to people in a certain way, and somewhat meaningful in a philosophical way, I respect other people's beliefs, and I do not mean to be irreverent should you have beliefs to the contrary of this. But the conclusion I draw, now, if they walk in now and say, Reg, your time is over, and you can only remember one thing from my talk, take this one. And if I could just give some career advice, which is much more important for some people than the overall progress of our community, believe it or not. That's also true in careers, as it is in society. I'm sorry, but your ability, I'm not saying to be liked, that's up to you, but your ability to work with other people effectively is more important than your raw ability to do work. And if you don't believe that, ask yourself, of all the open source people, how many can we find that are totally abrasive? I can name a couple. They're famous for being abrasive and being successful because they're just that smart. But for every one of them, there's like 10 who are also pretty good at telling a story or giving a presentation or answering questions on a mailing list and so on. Now, this was painful. I feel for that guy. There he is at a presentation, and he's talking about solid principles, and it's all good stuff, you know. Does anyone here know what those letters are from the acronym? There we go. It's good stuff, isn't it? Quality stuff? Yeah. Well, even if it's amazing stuff, I still feel sorry for that guy because, honestly, next to this business of social coding, they don't matter. They really don't. That guy could devote his whole life to writing books and going to shows and being on Twitter and whatever, and I have to tell him, psst. That feeling in your throat, it's the blue pill going down. The conclusion, coming back to Ruby, I did say this talk is about what Ruby can learn from Ruby programmers. We heard talk about a 2.1 and a 3.0, and what can I say? I'm here to evangelize. I think those of you who are interested in the future of Ruby, the programming language, and the future of Ruby, the community, should absolutely fix all the issues that have to do with C APIs and so on. And yeah, absolutely, do all that stuff. There's no reason to have a really crappy, broken typewriter. But when you dream at night, ask yourself, what could be different about the language that would make it even easier for us to do what's already made us successful? I mean, do I have to go through an exercise where I say, put up your hands, those who believe that Ruby's performance is what made it a successful language? And of course, everyone talks about functional programming in Ruby, except for people who actually do functional programming for a living, who will tell you how crappy it is in Ruby. The fact is, we got here because we're good at being social at scale. So if somebody was crazy enough to say, Reg, take some time, write a list of features that should be in the next version of Ruby, should I really be worrying about whether or not we should be doing some static type analysis to find out, whether we can trade and-ends for some sort of maybe monad optimized in the... No, that doesn't make any sense. That's like typewriter engineering. I'd be asking, what can we do to make the language support these things? Why do we believe that tools, be they GitHub or whatever, are over here, and the programming language is concerned with integers and whether doing object extended by a module, this is the latest thing someone was haranguing me about, said it invalidates the method cache, so it's really non-performant. Now, that's an important thing to know when the typewriter is under your hands. But if you step back for a minute, who the hell wants to spend their life optimizing, this performance cache thing? It's not really relevant to the success of the language in the future. Am I being too echoey? Okay, good. Now, we said earlier that Ruby programmers are social. We've also, another characteristic is that we love our tests. Am I correct? Is there anyone here who's like, oh, Reg, you're so like 2003, we've moved on from that, we don't test anymore? Okay, I just want to check, because sometimes I'm in Toronto, and Torontonians are famously polite, so there are very few people who walk up to me in the street and say, you idiot, we don't test anymore. Now, I said earlier, and there was a lot of unsupported stuff, but I said earlier that our only problem is defining success for our monkeys, for figuring out we want Gaudi, for separating the wheat from the chaff. Well, that's what tests are all about. And if we look at all of our practices, they flow from the tests. Fantastic. Not a lot of people chuckling like they were actually there for the first Star Wars in line, like I was in 1977, so that's a sign that we actually have some new blood and not a bunch of old fogies. Refactoring. Thou shalt not refactor without tests. Is that not true? Test-driven design. I don't know whoever said TDD is for development. Distributed development, continuous integration. Now, again, I'm trying to stay with the 5 plus or minus 2, but I think we could actually take this out to 15 or 20. If we wanted to, we could all put up our hands and say, hey, can somebody name another thing that flows from tests, that is supported by tests? All of our good practices come from tests. So my second conclusion, testing trumps typing. Now, this is very painful for a guy who spends an awful lot of time thinking about why being able to use a combinator to express recursion in Ruby is superior to just expressing recursion, but that's typing. And it's not nearly as important as testing. And here's a list. I'm told that I'm not supposed to read out what's on the list, but in every case, and more that we can think of, a testing-oriented practice is more important than a typing-oriented practice or a programming-oriented practice. Every single one. And that's true of careers as much as it's true of communities. If we go through Palo Alto or whatever and look at all the Mercedeses and so on and track back who owns them, they're generally people who have a say in what will be done as opposed to how it will be done. The value add is what will be done and whether it was done. In society, in our communities, I mean, what's more important? Actually implementing the fix to the problem I just said where extending an object's eigenclass with a module means it busts the cache and therefore it's non-performant? Or identifying whether that's important? Or being the person who says, yes, it's important and we need to do it because of this? Or, Reg, if you want to program that way, be my guest, but we've got bigger fish to fry in our language. Everything we do is around tests, and every testing activity is more important than a typing activity. I think isn't it for red? Am I blocking it? Is that what happens? Aha! When I look at the Ruby community, this is what I see. I got into it a little bit late. It was 2002, November 9th. Some fellow named Paul Graham, I don't know what he's doing these days with himself. But anyways, back then he was on something called the Lightweight Languages mailing list, and a lot of people were chit-chatting about things, so he organized a one-day conference. And he had two keynotes, one just after breakfast and one just after lunch. And he wanted to make it interesting for people, so the first speaker was somebody named Joe Armstrong, who was talking about this language, Erlang, that they were using in switches. And Paul Graham had the gall to be telling us that we should care about Erlang and parallelization and all of the functional issues. And all these people who were sitting in the room were lispers. And Joe Armstrong is getting up and saying, this is an actual functional language, and what you're doing isn't a functional language. And it's possible to have a functional language with message passing and all this stuff that doesn't care about object-orientedness or MapReduce or whatever. It was a spirited Q&A after he gave his talk. Then there were a few more talks. Usually the Q&A punctuated with, how do you do macros in your language? I kid you not. Everyone is macro-obsessed. Then after lunch, this quietly spoken gentleman from Japan talked about his language, Ruby. And at the time, I was actually fooling around with something else. I was a Java programmer. And I went through the incredible yak shaving of trying to get Ruby working properly on a Windows machine in 2002. Now, I have to tell you, it was so painful that I switched away from Windows machines, but it was so good. It was like peeling a scab off or something. Oh my God, programming in Ruby really was joyful compared to, well, the alternatives. And, from that time to now, I can't really say how things went from 96 till 2002, when I first saw Ruby. But from that time to now, what I've seen in every case is that Ruby's success comes from Ruby's community. And so when I think to myself, what does the future hold for Ruby? What are the most important problems to solve? What features should we add to the language? What features should we add to tools we build around the language? These two things keep coming back. We have to spend less time worrying about extending the various enumerators and so on, and generators and so on. All of it, it's good stuff. I mean, some people love working with typewriters. But we need to spend more time thinking about what can the language do to further enable, accelerate, support, whatever the correct word is, our social behavior and our testing behavior. I love the test frameworks and libraries that are out there, but I have to tell you, if Mats rushes down the aisle here and says, I give you the magic wand to make one change to Ruby, I would say the language itself should just decide what the right way testing is and bake it in and not have 50 libraries. It should be more integrated. It shouldn't be an afterthought glued on by somebody writing a library. We should just get with the program and say, you know what, Ruby's about testing. And the same thing with social coding. I don't know what the answer is. But you know what? Just because I can't think of the answer doesn't mean 1, 2, 3 from the back, from the right on the back there. Doesn't mean that person can't think of an answer. I can only identify that if I look at this thing 10 years from now, I will be able to decide whether or not all the monkeys in this room and elsewhere were successful. Whether we've been better at being a culture and a society, and whether we were better at spending more time on quality testing and less time on typing. And so I came here to say what I think Ruby the language and Ruby the community can learn from watching Ruby the programmers and Ruby's success, and there's my answer. We can be better at being social coders and better at testing. And all I ask you to do is go out and bang away on typewriters and make it happen. Thank you very much.
So first, I wanted to say thank you very much for your talk, because it's like opened my eyes on various things I've never thought about. For example, the sociality on that scale, I've never thought that that's possible. So, but one thing I've just thought about it, because
Hang on.
Yeah, I'm with him.
All right.
I love all the other people my age and experience and so on, but odds are I'll learn more from his question than anybody else my own age. Just a guess. Go ahead.
So, social coding may come with very unexpected things because, for example, when a person, for example, a beginner, releases something to open source, for example, like his first library or her first library, whatever, and he not or she doesn't only release the library for the sake of releasing it. He expects or she expects the feedback from the community and everything. So I would like to say that we should be really careful about like criticizing people who only start contributing, and because we should be like careful not to lose the ideas that sometimes can come in very unexpected places.
I agree with that 100%. And for what it's worth, so I said I started in the 70s. I was maybe 12 or 13, and I used to sneak into the high-speed job stream at the University of Toronto, where they had a room for undergrads, and because it was only this big IBM mainframe that you did in a batch job by putting punch cards in, they didn't bother checking people's ID or anything. So if you just walked in and acted like you belonged there, try to imagine 12-year-old me walking in amongst all these people and acted like you're supposed to be there, you could program. And you know, I honestly don't know. I can't give you a guarantee, but I'm pretty sure, given the fact that I'm a little bit shy, that the first 5 people I met told me, "What the fuck are you doing here? Get your skinny ass out of here. We've got work to do. I'm trying to get a degree, and you're asking me questions about your Fortran program that prints the multiplication table." I might not be here today. It's very true. Especially people who are first getting started, it's, you know, how they imprint with us it matters. Thank you.
Mr. Nutter.
Hi, Reg. As a typewriter repairman, I'm not going to disagree with the fundamental thesis here. I totally agree that what has made Ruby successful and kept it successful is this social community, and it's why I love coming to these events more than any others. I like working with these people. That said, the people that I've talked to that have ostensibly left the community did not leave because it wasn't social enough. They left despite the fact that it was the best community they were ever in, because their typewriter was so broken and they were unable to be successful. And the most social monkeys in the world will not produce anything on 1 million or an infinite number of broken typewriters. So I think perhaps the more important aspect here is not just the fact that we are social, but that we understand what causes people to leave that society, and make sure that we're not just dismissing them out of hand. Node developers are all a bunch of idiots, of course, and people who go to Clojure don't realize you can do functional programming in Ruby. That's the wrong attitude. What we need to understand is, what is it about Ruby that is not allowing these social people who want to be Rubyists to be successful within our community?
Just to clarify the question, you're okay with us being monkeys? It's the typewriter's fault. All right, good. Let's just clarify that.
All right. Now, that was one of those, I have to respond. That was one of those questions that's also a statement. And I like the statement, but I'm going to respond to the question as well. So, I think it's true that monkeys can't do anything without functioning typewriters of some kind. And this is one of these areas where, now if we can just drop into some management speak, people sometimes talk about hygienic motivations, or about culture hygiene, or about company hygiene, or hygienic software development practices. I don't know, is anyone familiar with what that means in these contexts? Okay, so here's how hygiene works. Let's say I'm dating. I'm sorry to break it to the axe people, but the actual choice of perfume and so on is almost irrelevant to the measured outcomes. However, failure to bathe has a direct correlation to the measured outcomes. Bathing is hygienic. If you smell in a bad way, you don't get any dates. But once you reach a certain sort of minimum level of acceptability, after that, what exactly you do to perfume yourself is almost irrelevant to the outcome. The same thing some people say about programmers and pay. Most programmers get very upset and quit and are very unhappy if they perceive that they are being underpaid. But very few, once they are paid in what's in their mind enough, very few of them really quit what they're doing to get another 10,000 or 20,000. Money for many programmers is a hygienic motivation. It's more important that they not be underpaid than it is that they maximize their pay. So getting back to what's going on here, if we want to sort of take this beyond just 30-minute chit-chatty, oh, look, there's a guy up there who seems comfortable talking about stuff, and think about this at the next level of analysis, what I would say is that things like JRuby and so on are attempts to address hygienic problems, problems which, if not corrected, like bathing, are a complete fail, but that once you reach a certain minimum level of acceptability, you know, your brain power may be better spent moving on to the next big thing. We have not reached that yet, so I totally understand you're investing. You're saying, hey, you know, there's open source here, and open source here. But yeah, that's how I would try to put what you're saying in context. I don't know if you would agree that I'm grasping where you're coming from.
Yeah, that seems to fit what I'm thinking as well.
Hi, great talk, thank you. But there's some point I don't agree.
Good.
Actually, it's Chinese here, so in my part of China, we don't hire people 1 for 10. So I'm not quite sure somewhere else that hire 10 Chinese or Indian to replace one of local workers. Probably in China, we hire a robot for 10 Chinese maybe. But so if you have any example that can point that support your point, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't fully grasp what you're saying there. You're saying in your area of China, you don't what?
We don't hire people to replace 10 Chinese.
Oh, you don't hire 20 people to replace 10 Chinese. Is that what you're saying?
1 people from America or from Europe.
Oh, you don't hire 1 from Europe to replace 10 Chinese. Oh, just, you know, they don't do that in America either. I'm not sure there's a question there. What is the question, other than a statement of fact about China?
I'll tell you what, it might be easier if you...
Pardon? Were you offended by something I said?
My question is, do you have any example that support your point?
That
Hire 10 Chinese or Indian for 1 people?
Who does that? Oh, American and Canadian corporations are full of people who do that. That does not mean that all of society does it or all of America does it, but American companies are full of organizations that do that. Now, speaking to outsourcing, one of the problems is this. If you look at a company, say, replacing a couple of engineers with an outsourcing company, you might get the impression that somehow 2 Americans are worth 5 Chinese or something. That's not true. It's probably the other way around, statistically. But what happens is they're dealing not with, they don't get to choose any Chinese programmer or any Indian programmer or any African programmer or any Latin American programmer or any American programmer from a lower cost of living area that can work for less. They get to choose from those programmers who choose to work for outsourcing companies and choose to be managed a certain way and choose to work in certain environments. And as a result, those people who are engaged in the outsourcing business tend to be a different quality of person than those people who are, for example, you have a rocketry program in China, am I correct? Yes? There's you put rockets in space in China, correct? And obviously there are programmers involved. And obviously those are extremely smart programmers. But none of those programmers are available if I get on the phone and say, I'd like to hire a Chinese programmer. They have no interest whatsoever in working with me. So when I say that there are American companies who try to replace 2 Americans with 5 Chinese, it is not correct to say that is representative of the quality of Chinese programmers as a whole, if we had some way of measuring them, or the quality of American programmers as a whole. It refers specifically to this particular transaction that involves Chinese programmers who are available to do remote work, usually through a big company, who is organized around selling those services to the kind of company that can buy those programmers remotely. Yes.
What he's saying is, he's asking, or you can clarify.
This has nothing to do with being Chinese. You're absolutely correct. The way I know this is that I'm in that business. I'm in what I like to call nearshoring. Living in Toronto, in the Eastern Time Zone, I have a lower cost of living than programmers who are working on the West Coast of the United States. That is something that I definitely have used in the past and will continue to use as an argument as to why, it's a good economic deal to deal with me back when I was consulting. So there's no statement about the quality of my work or whatever. It's just that particular section of the economies. Anyways, I definitely meant no disrespect to any particular cultural or national group. And
Please, 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 put your hands together for Reg Braithwaite.
Thank you.